the examples of those today, maybe another time in future weeks. So let's have a look at the first example today. We're going to look at a bar chart, and this is based on people playing different sports in Canada. So this is the question with the diagram. And so what's the question? The bar chart shows active participation rates in top 10 sports in 1998 and 2005. So it's a very simple question. And one guide is that your introduction shouldn't really be more than 2 or 3 words longer than the actual question. It's a simple guide when you're practicing. So what can we do to write an introduction for this? So at the top of the screen, we have the question again. And things to consider. Well, as I mentioned before, bar chart can be changed to chart, shows to illustrates. This question has active participation rates. So we can change rates to the percentage rate. Active participation, which can change the form of a verb or a noun, so actively participating. A good way to paraphrase a country is to change it to the nationality. So Canada will become Canadians. And the question says top 10 sports. And we can simply change that to the 10 most popular sports. Changing active participation to actively participating will be seen as by the examiner as an example of complex vocabulary. And practicing changing nouns and verbs, the forms, is a good way of improving your vocabulary band score. So what does that mean that we end up with here? Well, here is the example that I've written. So the chart illustrates the percentage rate of Canadians actively participating in the 10 most popular sports in 1998 and 2005. So the question is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. The question is 15 words. And the introduction example is just 3 or 4 words longer. And that's what you should aim for. And with plenty of practice, you should be able to do that in about a minute on the actual IELTS writing test. Let's have a look at a line graph this time. So in this case, we have a line graph. We have 5 lines. Each line here is clearly colored. And each line represents 5 different countries. So Germany, Italy, France, the UK, and Belgium. And the question is, the chart below shows the percentage of female members of parliament in 5 European countries from 2000 to 2012. So again, the question is fairly simple. So how can we paraphrase? So again, at the top of the screen, we have the question, and below it, some examples of what we can paraphrase. So the chart below shows we can change to the line graph illustrates. Female members, we can change to women elected. You could also change female members to members who are female. 5 European countries, let's change it to 5 European nations. And again, focus on the date range. So the question says from 2000 to 2012. And simply change it to between 2000 and 2012. So we end up with an example. The line graph illustrates the percentage of women elected to the parliaments in 5 European nations between 2000 and 2012. So the two examples you've seen so far, the language being used is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. As I said, you can show the examiner you understand how to change the form of verbs or nouns. And that is an example of complex vocabulary. But the point is, here, these examples are not trying to introduce any unusual words, any very high level vocabulary, because in task 1 writing, you're actually writing a report, and a report is designed to be quickly read and the analysis of the report quickly understood. So if any students who think they need to, for example, look in their dictionary for unusual synonyms of words in the questions, that is not something that's required in task 1 writing, and it could actually have a negative effect on your band score. All the examiner wants from you is for you to show the examiner that you have the ability to paraphrase the question using everyday language. Let's have a look at another example. I think we've got 5 examples today altogether. So this time we're going to look at a pie chart. So when you get a pie chart question, most often you will get 2 pie charts. Occasionally you get 3 or 4. I've even seen one with 6, but nearly always it's 2 pie charts. This one's a little bit unusual because it has a time period. Most pie charts are basically the same year. But when it comes to writing the introduction, that doesn't really make much difference to what you do. So let's have a look at the question. The pie chart show figures for the use of public libraries in 1990 and 2000 in Britain. And you can see we have the number of visits, 290 million in 1991 and 350 million in the year 2000. And underneath the 2 pie charts, we have the 5 different criteria. So let's have a look at what we can do with the introduction. So what can you paraphrase? Well, in the question it says show, so we can change that to provide. Provide is just as good as the previous example where we used illustrates. The question says figures, we can change that to information. Don't get confused by using numbers because the question uses percentages. So numbers is not a synonym of percentages. That's a frequent error with some students. The next part of the question says for the use. Well, that really means why people are using the library, so about the reasons why people visited. This question has got 2 years, 1990 and 2000. So we can change that for 2 years, comma, 1991 and 2000. So by putting a comma in, we're demonstrating to the examiner that we understand how to use basic punctuation. And then finally, Britain. Can Britain be paraphrased? Well, when students see Britain in a question, they often paraphrase it by writing the United Kingdom. Well, that's wrong actually, because Britain and the United Kingdom are not the same. Britain actually is the island of Britain, and it only has 3 of the nations that make up the United Kingdom, being Scotland, Wales and England, whereas the United Kingdom also includes Northern Ireland. So you cannot paraphrase Britain with the United Kingdom. But what you can do, as you see in the example, you can change Britain to Great Britain, which is the official name for the island. And similarly, if the question says Great Britain, just simply paraphrase it by removing the word great and just writing Britain. So we end up with an introduction example as the pie chart provide information about the reasons why people visited public libraries in Great Britain for 2 years, comma, 1991 and 2000. Again, the question has been completely paraphrased, but the example is easy to read. One last thing, a mistake often made by students is here. If I highlight it. If we write the pie charts, then the next word, in this case, it's provide, but it could be show or illustrate. That word after charts must be in the single form. So you end up with a combination of plural with singular. If you look at it the other way around, if we have the pie chart, then provide will be changed to the plural form. And a frequent error I see with students is both words are written either in the single form or in the plural form. And that is a simple error that, if an examiner sees it, will have a negative impact on the way that the examiner thinks you can control your vocabulary and grammar. So, I repeat, if charts or diagrams is in the plural form, the next word must be singular. If chart and diagram is in the single form, then the next word must be in the plural form. Simple rule to remember. Let's go to one more example. So here we're going to look at a table. So the table below gives information about the percentage of land covered by forests in various countries in 1990 and 2005, with estimated figures for 2015. So this example is very different than the previous ones because the time period goes into the future. Because the question is based on a time period of a present time period of 2005. And that change to future has to be reflected in your introduction. So let's have a look at what we can do. So what can we paraphrase? Well, below gives information. We can change that to indicates. About the percentage, we can change that to the proportion. Various so various countries is in the question. We can change that to 4 different countries. And the question says estimated figures. We can change that to projected figures. And below we have the introduction example. So the table indicates the proportion of land covered by forest in 4 different countries in 1990 and 2005, as well as projected figures for 2015. And actually in this example, the introduction example is slightly shorter than the question. So, to conclude this part of today's presentation, writing an introduction, you need to practice different diagrams. Your target is to write an introduction in a maximum of 2 minutes. The length of your introduction should be similar to the length of the question, at most 3 or 4 words longer. And finally, keep it simple. Do not try and introduce any unusual or what you might believe are complex words. It's just not necessary. All right, now we're going to go and start looking at overviews. I'm going to show you a video in a minute from YouTube. IELTS Liz, she's an IELTS teacher in the north of England. And I think some of her videos are actually really useful for students. So just give me a few seconds to change over and I'll play the video for you. It's not too long, only about 3 or 4 minutes.
Hello, my name's Liz. In this episode, I'm going to look at Well, the answer...
I'm just going to start it again.
Hello, my name's Liz. Yep. In this lesson, I'm going to look at if you need a conclusion or an overview for IELTS Writing Task 1. This is a very important question and many students ask me about it. If you do the wrong thing, then that will affect your band score. So I'm going to look at 5 different questions. Do I need a conclusion for Task 1? What is an overview? Is the overview important? Can I write an overview and a conclusion? And where can I put the overview? Let's have a look at the first question. Do I need a conclusion for Task 1? Well, the answer is no, you don't. In fact, it's a bad idea to have a conclusion for Task 1. You have an overview for Task 1 and you have a conclusion for Task 2 for your essay. Now, a conclusion is a paragraph that repeats and restates the main points. And of course, in a short report, you shouldn't be repeating any information. So don't have a conclusion, but you do need to have an overview. So that's question 2. What is an overview? Well, an overview is a paragraph and it contains all the key features of the chart or graph or whatever you have for your Task 1. So all the key points are collected together and put in an overview paragraph. Is the overview important? It is so important. It is critical for your IELTS Writing Task 1. This is for the criteria task achievement. That's 25% of your marks. And if you don't have an overview, it will be almost impossible to get above band score 5 for that criteria. So very important indeed. And number 4, can I write an overview and a conclusion? Please don't. Again, the overview contains all the key features and the conclusion is a repeat. We don't want repetitive information. Also, when you have an overview and a conclusion together, it means that you're dividing your key features into 2 different places, and this will affect the criteria of coherence and cohesion, which is all about paragraphs. So it's very important that all your key features are collected in one paragraph in the overview, and they're not again repeated anywhere else in that report. So definitely you cannot have both. And the last one, where can I put the overview? So the overview statement, usually it will go after the introduction, but it is possible to put it at the end of your report after the body paragraphs. Which is the best place? For me, I prefer it after the introduction. I like to read all the main points before I read the details. But again, that's up to you. Both places are logical. Now, if you want some more lessons, here are some links to help you prepare for your IELTS test. See you soon.
All right, so she's answered 1 or 2 questions there that I'm frequently asked. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at the same questions that we looked at the overview at the introduction, and we'll go through the overviews. So firstly, let's have a look at an introduction to overviews. So the overview has traditionally been located at the end of the report. However, these days it is more popular to put it as a second paragraph after the introduction. It should not be included in the introduction paragraph for a data diagram, although sometimes it can be the second sentence of the introduction for a process or map diagram. The overview paragraph should begin with a word or phrase such as overall, to sum up, or in summary. Never use the phrase in conclusion. For a data diagram, the overview will be different, depending on whether the diagram is dynamic or static. A dynamic diagram will have a time period. So, for example, a line graph will nearly always be dynamic, whilst a pie chart is often static. An overview for a data diagram should be one sentence, 25 to 35 words long, describing two main trends or comparative statements from the diagram, using the words such as and or whilst to link the two trends together. For a dynamic diagram, the first thing to look for is, have the overall numbers or percentages increased or decreased? Additional trends could be how the data has changed, fluctuating. What is the most important or significant piece of data? Or what piece of data has changed the most? Describing something of the highest or lowest is not acceptable for a high band score. And a good overview must cover the whole time period. For a static overview, the focus should be on the most important or significant, with a general comparison statement for the second trend, comparing how important or less important the other data criteria are. A process overview should include how many stages in the process, and a map overview is a short description of how the location has changed over the time period. They would tend to be 15 to 25 words. So let's go back and look at our bar chart. So we have a time period here. Therefore, this is a dynamic diagram. So the diagram is titled Active Participation Rates in Sports in Canada in Percentages. And 1998 are the columns with the crossed lines, and 2005 the black ones. So what kind of things can we see here for the overview? Well, straight away, it's pretty obvious that in 1998, there was more participation in sport than in 2005. Because with the exception of soccer, every sport in 2005 has a lower participation rate. So the participation rate has fallen, and that would be the first part of the overview. For the second part, you could say that the sport that's changed the most is baseball, possible. Or you could state which sports continue to be the most popular. Soccer is the one sport that's different than the rest, but that should be mentioned in the body paragraph, not in the overview. Never put exceptions in an overview. They should go in the body paragraph. So let's have a look at what we've done. So there we have the introduction and two body paragraphs. These are the points to consider. Have the participation rates increased or decreased? Which sports are the most important and which sport participation has changed the most? And here's the model overview below it. So overall, it can be seen that golf and ice hockey continue to be the most common sports in Canada, while the participation rates of most sports declined during the period shown. So, in the introduction to this part, I said that an overview should be one sentence, and there should be two main trends or comparative examples in the overview. And this example meets those requirements. Let's now go to the line graph. So we have 5 line graphs. And when we look at the start point in the year 2000, all 5 lines have increased. There is one line that's slightly different from the others, and that's the green one for Belgium. But despite the fact that since 2008 there has been a fall in numbers or percentages, overall, over the whole period, the percentages have increased. So in the year 2000, Belgium was, let's say, about 17%. And in 2012, it had increased to about 24%. So despite the fall, the overall percentages has increased. And quite often with line graphs, they will put an example like this in the diagram. And it's put there deliberately to try and confuse students. So here we have the introduction with 2 body paragraphs. When we look at the overview, did the numbers percentages increase or decrease? Well, they increased. What was the most important? What changed the most, and how did the lines move? And here is the model overview. Overall, over the period shown, all the countries experienced an upward trend in the percentage of female MEPs, whilst Italy moved into first place. So that's another feature that you could highlight in an overview. And if we look at the diagram, Italy, which is the yellow line, moved from second place into first. So it's quite acceptable to put that example of Italy as the second most important trend in the overview. But the most important one is that overall the numbers of, or the percentages of MEPs has increased during the period. Let's have a look at the pie charts. So, as I mentioned before, this pie chart is a dynamic chart because it's comparing 2 different years. Therefore, we are looking for trends in the percentages. So, some of these percentages have changed quite a lot. For example, we have a 10% in 1991, and now it's 20% in the year 2000. We had another 10% in 1991. We now have a 2%. We had a 15% in 1991. We now have 5%. And the largest part of the pie chart has changed from 65% to 55%. But we also, in the year 2000, have a new reason for use of public libraries. and that is now 18%. That did not exist in 1991. So how can we transfer that information into an overview? Well, here we have the introduction with the 2 body paragraphs. And in the overview, so did the numbers or percentages increase or decrease? Well, if we just quickly go back to the diagram, in 1991 we had 290 million visits, and in the year 2000 we have 350 million. So the numbers of users has increased. What changed the most? Which was the most important, or is there any other key feature? So here's the overview. Overall, the use of libraries increased, although the reasons for visiting changed considerably during the period. And when we go back to the diagram, yes, all the reasons for using the library did change quite a bit. The fact that there is a new reason for using the library, that should not go in the overview because it's an exception. That should go in one of the body paragraphs. Let's have a look at the table. So what have we got here? It's quite a simple table, 4 countries. There are 3 criteria for each country. Percentage of land covered by forest, 1990. And again in 2005. And then the estimated 10 years later. So what are the trends here? Well, for Australia, we see a gradual fall. For New Zealand, a gradual increase. For Brazil, we have a decrease. Again, it's fairly gradual because this is over a 25-year period. Although you could argue it's a lot more significant than the changes that have occurred in Australia and New Zealand. And for Chile, we have a gradual increase over the period. So in many ways, you could argue this is a really boring diagram. There isn't a lot happening. So what can we do about an overview? So here we have the introduction, followed by 2 body paragraphs. And let's move to the overview. So who has increased and decreased? So we know that 2 countries increased and 2 countries decreased. Did anything change a lot? Not really. And because this question is a projection for the future, what will happen in the future? That needs to go as an added trend in the overview. If you don't include that in the overview, then the examiner would say this is not a complete overview, and it would mean that your band score could not go higher than a band 6. So when we look at the overall overview, overall New Zealand and Chile have an increase in the proportion of forested land, whereas Brazil and Australia experienced a decrease. And these trends are expected to continue in the future. So, nothing too complex about the overview, but it does highlight the main trends. All right, what I'm going to do now, because in previous presentations I haven't spent a lot of time on tables, I'm going to go through a full example of how to answer a table question. So, describing an IELTS table is similar to describing charts or graphs. The same structures of comparison and contrast are used, or language have changed if the table is over time. The table is just another way to present information. It does not require that you learn a new type of language or a new way to organize things. For example, we'll take a look at this table showing the quality of life in 4 countries presented in the table. So what do we have? Well, we have 4 countries, Bangladesh, Bolivia, 5 countries, Bangladesh, Bolivia, Egypt, Indonesia, and the USA. And what stands out? Well, in terms of GNP, that's gross national product per head, the USA is a lot higher than the other countries. Daily calorie supply per head. Well, Bangladesh to Bolivia and Indonesia are very similar. Egypt is a lot higher, and the USA is even higher. Life expectancy and birth, again, there's a big difference between the USA and the other countries. And infant mortality, so that's how many babies die soon after birth. And the numbers for the USA are significantly lower. When you compare the USA with Bangladesh, it's a difference of a factor of 11. Same with Bolivia. And even with Indonesia and Egypt, it's a difference of a factor of about 8. These are huge differences. For life expectancy, an American would expect to live twice as long as somebody from Bangladesh. When it comes to daily calorie supply, Americans probably eat 50% more calories than the other countries. And when it comes to gross national product per head, then the difference is more than 20 times in the case of Bangladesh. So let's have a look at another represent. So the same data could be represented in the form of a bar graph. But the problem with this is because the USA's numbers are so much higher than the others, it would really distort the overall graph. So it is better described as in a table. So, analysing the table. As with all graphs and charts, when describing tables, do not describe all the data presented. Present the main points of each feature. You should make sure you mention each feature though. Look for significant data, so the most important, highest to least to lowest. Try and group the data. This may require you to use some general knowledge of the world, such as recognizing developed and developing countries. So we have 5 countries here. Clearly the USA is a developed country and the other 4 are developing countries. So this is the question. The following table gives statistics showing the aspects of life in 5 countries. So what do you look for? What is the table measuring? Well, it's measuring numbers. Is it dynamic or static? Well, in this case, it's static because it only shows 1 year. What type of language do you need to use? Is it change, comparing and contrasting? What tense would you use? So dynamic diagrams tend to use a mixture of past and present, sometimes future. Static diagrams tend to use either just one grammar tense, present or past. Which country has the best quality of life and which has the worst? What information could you use for an overview? How could you group the information? And how many paragraphs would you have? And what would you write about in each one? So if you're making a plan, you should always ask yourself these kind of questions before you write your task 1. You can then use the answer to these questions to make yourself a quick plan. So here are some notes made by a student during the planning stage. So this is based on the year 1982, so it's going to be in the past. The language is comparison because it's a static diagram. There's no trends. So for the overview, the USA was far higher. Using the expression far higher is more complex than using the expression the highest. And when we look at the groups, you could put the 5 countries into 3 groups by grouping Egypt, Indonesia and Bolivia together, with the US and Bangladesh separated. So now take a look at the IELTS table model answer and notice how the organisation matches the plan. The groups chosen that are similar are grouped together into paragraphs. The language is focused on the language of comparison and contrast, as the table is not over time. And the compare and contrast structures have been highlighted so you can see how they are used. And is it similar to the way that you would have organised the information? And here we have the model answer. So the table uses 4 economic indicators to show the standard of living in 5 selected countries in 1982. To begin, the USA, which is the only developed country, had the highest GNP at $13,160 per head. It also had a much higher daily calorie intake and life expectancy, and the lowest rate of infant mortality. The other developing countries had quality of life ratings that were significantly lower. The range of indicators for Egypt, Indonesia, and Bolivia was similar, with Egypt having the highest quality of life amongst the 3. However, the infant mortality rate in Egypt was slightly higher than Indonesia's at 97 deaths per thousand compared to 78 in Indonesia. Bangladesh had by far the lowest quality of life in all the indicators. Its GNP was 100 times smaller than the USA's. its calorie intake and life expectancy were about half those of the USA, and its infant mortality rate was 10 times greater. Overall, it can be seen that the quality of life in the USA was far higher than the other 4 countries, and this fact has an impact when comparing all the criteria. So, the highlighted vocabulary are the comparative expressions. And when you look at it, it's about 40% of the complete answer. It's about 60 words. And students spend too much time simply describing the diagrams. You must get out of that habit, because just describing means you will only get a low band score. You have to compare. That's what the question asks you to do. Every Task 1 writing question asks you to compare the information on the diagram. Therefore, using comparative expressions like this is what the examiner is looking for. So, when you practice, think about how much describing you're actually doing, and check how much comparing you're actually doing. Describing will not get you a high band score. Comparing is the way to move to a higher band score. Because that is what is asked for in the question. The question doesn't ask you to describe things. Describing is only used to support the data and how you compare the data. So we're coming to the end of today's presentation. We've covered 3 different things today: how to write an introduction quickly, what to look for in an overview, and how to use the language of comparison with a table being used as an example. As I said at the start, if you want a copy of the slides, then ask GLN Centre. They're quite happy to for you to have a copy. And I hope you found the examples today useful to your future studying. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them on the group chat. If you can't think of a question now, but think of one later, then just send a message to the GLN Centre and they'll pass it on to me to give you an answer. All right, anyway, so thanks for listening. I hope you found today useful. Next week, we are going to do a short presentation on reading skills, something I actually haven't done for a long time, but I hope that you join us next week on Saturday at 10 AM, and for the rest of the day, hope that you have a good day. Okay, so thanks for listening and goodbye.
Tuyệt vời. Các bạn có câu hỏi gì cho thầy Terry không ạ? Nếu không có câu hỏi gì cho thầy thì các bạn có thể điền thông tin vào phiếu khảo sát để có thể nhận được slide buổi học này. Ok, hẹn gặp các bạn vào tuần sau ạ. Chào các bạn.